We're all in right now. So maybe I figured we could go around the table, introduce ourselves, and maybe just talk, names, what we do for work, what drew you to this session, and then for fun, maybe like your favorite open tab as well, the tab that's open on your computer right now. Um, so I am happy to start. Jason, I think it would make sense for you to close. So then maybe I'll go, well, we'll just popcorn it. We'll just like throw it over to the next person. So my name is Herbert. I am the host for this session. Thank you for the honor of letting me do this, Jason. Um, I my day job is at a company called Figma, where I work as on the marketing team as a content strategist. Um, and what drew me to the session, I mean, aside from Jason's very interesting story and lots of really great ideas, was just I think that everyone is going to be pivoting a lot more, whether it's in startups, in your career or whatnot. I think we've already entered an age where like constant changes externally require also like constant adaptations on our parts in order to get ahead, stay ahead. Um, and so yeah, I'm super interested in this notion of pivots. Um, and where it fits in. For me, I'm I don't have that many open tabs, I realize right now. I have one open tab, and that is the question list for this session. I'm dedicated, I'm focused. However, if I'm freestyling, I don't, I'm sorry, guys. I don't think I read anything that interesting today. So I will have to, yeah, make that answer suffice, unfortunately. Um, Faye, I'm gonna hand the mic over to you. It would be great to hear from you. What's your name, what you do for work, what drew you to the session, and what's your favorite open tab?
Sure. Thanks a lot. My name is Faye. I work at an international NGO where I'm the director of strategy and learning. Strategy is what brought me probably to this session. I'm in the middle of our second acquisition, and it's really revolves around this idea of pivoting quite a bit, how you pivot an existing business that may not be a startup, may be more of a dinosaur, but it's extremely difficult to do. So I love all these topics. I've heard Jason speak before, and I'm really here for him and for his book. So that's a little bit about me. Um, I'm interested in all things strategy, really, in today's day and age, and with how fast things are moving. Pivoting and adapting are just the name of the game. In terms of open tabs, I'm the opposite of you, Herbert. I have so many open tabs, but my favorite today has been a poetry tab as something as a diversion from the fast-moving world. So always looking for something to ground in. So I think I'll hand it off. I don't know if Trey is there.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Um, I'm Trey. I'm from Alabama. I'm a researcher. Um, and I am here because I'm getting more and more interested in the pivot topic because we live in a world of pivots. And it looks like at any moment, we're going to be pivoting on what, every 2 years, 3 years, every year. Who knows? So can't wait to hear more. And I'll throw it over to, I believe it's Wayne Gerard. Or did I get that right?
Yes, that's me. Thank you. My name's Wayne. I previously co-founded a company with Jason. I work at Meta as a software engineer most of the time. I'm actually on parental leave at the moment. And I think other than just wanting to support Jason generally, I said this to Jason at some point, but I think we all go through pivots in life, not even just in terms of startups or business. I think we have inflection points in our lives, and it requires a lot of aligning, exploring, and committing on those changes. So I like the idea of taking this framework and thinking about how it might apply to my everyday life. Open tabs. I apologize if this sounds super nerdy, but I found a very small web server framework written in C++, which I thought was really fascinating because most of the time they're not written in C++, they're written in like Ruby or Python or etc. Part of the joy of parental leave has been re-exploring software development for myself and not, for work. I will pass it off to, how about Jason?
Oh, I'm gonna go last. So I'm
Oh,
gonna
sorry.
move yours along to Tossin. Tossin, if you're there.
Hi everyone. So I'm Tahsin. I'm from India, and I just want to continue where Herbert left off. Did I get your name right, Herbert?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I mean I couldn't agree more with him about he said we have to pivot a lot right now, and like I have pivoted a lot of times in my career. I started in tech, then I moved to writing, then marketing, then right now I'm in business with my dad. So and with the topic of this meeting being pivot, this is what attracted me here. And another is obviously Jason. I know him from Twitter. So yeah. So yeah, and then I would like to maybe who's left? Kevin, I guess.
Yes, it's Kevin. Kevin, you mentioned you were driving. Is it a convenient time to talk, or is it both hands on the wheel and eyes on the road? I mean, hold on, I'm asking you that, but I realize might not be convenient to respond. And it's not a blink twice type of situation. Well, we'll give you a couple seconds just to chime in, if it is convenient. Okay, it might not be a good time for Kevin to respond right now. Kevin will keep you on listening mode, but please do feel free to turn your camera on or chime in the chat or on the mic whenever is a good time for you. I think that I think Jason, I think you're the lucky
All
last.
right, I've put this off long enough. Hello everyone. Faye, I do remember you from another Interintellect Salon, and the jog. I needed a strategy jog to remember that. So thanks for being a return Salon-er. Yeah, I'm Jason Shen. I am an executive coach. I wrote a book called The Path to Pivots. It's a playbook for founders who want to reboot their startup. And I do think some of the principles of the book apply in a number of other contexts, which I think people are interested in. So we'll have a chance to kind of dig into that. I went and dug around my tabs to find something good to say. And the best thing I can think of is what I was working on earlier, which is someone highlighting one of these AI headshot tools. I tried some of them a year or two ago when they were kind of hot, and I felt like they didn't reproduce my face very well, and I have long hair. Well, that's tied up right now, but I have long hair, and it doesn't seem to recreate long hair very well because I think it codes it gender wise to female, so it doesn't know how to make a male face that has long hair. And so I was like, someone had said this one's really great, so I tried it and it's still not good. And I'm like, okay, we can hold off the AI revolution for a little longer. They can't figure out guys with long hair. I'm an anomaly. Yeah, Trey says the last tab he has open is Henry Oliver's second act, another Interintellect host's book. It sounds like it's coming out. So good for Henry, and hope Trey, you have a good time with that one. Cool. So yes, that's I think I made my intro.
Yes, that sounds great. And thanks for sharing both Jason and Trey. I think just to give everyone a sense of what we want to do here, and also to open up an opportunity to maybe improvise, I was thinking that we could, we've all gotten to know each other a little bit now. It would be nice to start off maybe with some orientation, get a sense of Jason's working background for those of you who's less familiar, and then talk a little bit more about the book and some of the core frameworks behind it. But then after that, I think we can go in one of two directions. We can continue exploring the book, or we can, a lot of you mentioned in your intros that you're interested in pivots, whether it's in the situation of an acquisition and trying to change an organization, or being in a family business, or working in research and trying to learn more about the pivot topic. So we could also kind of spend some time with each of you, and it would be great to hear from you and see what kind of thoughts the orientation sparks, and then like we can do more of that type of Q&A driven by each of you, and maybe even in the vibe of like a group coaching session. So how does everyone feel? Would you prefer to go down deep diving into the book after the orientation? Or actually, maybe we'll do the orientation first and then pause there and choose path A or path B. So I'll pause there for a sec. Let me know if any thoughts, questions, ideas. If not, we can kick off the orientation. Okay, cool. Let's kick it off. So Jason, you've kind of briefly introduced yourself and what you do, but it would be great to hear more about, well, maybe it's more comfortable if, I start to explain, because you have a long list of accomplishments, amongst them, having sold a company to Meta. You've earned 2 world records. Like these are quite astonishing things, and I'm just, barely even scraping the tip of the iceberg here. But I think what we're here to discuss is your book, The Path to Pivot, which is just coming out now. It would be great to hear you briefly describe what it's all about.
Yeah, and Herbert, I'm happy to do a brief intro for those to kind of set the frame for the book. I think I'm a first generation immigrant. I moved here from China as a kid, and I was this hyperactive, hyper curious little boy running around, kind of causing trouble, and got put into the gymnastics gym as a form of daycare. My mom was a gymnastics coach. My dad worked in education. So I was always around people who were interested in developing others through learning and through coaching and so those mediums. So that really was a big animating factor of my youth. I loved the computers. I loved the internet, and sort of just emerging when I was growing up. And because of my gymnastics training, I got a chance to go to Stanford, where I competed for the team there. And that's when I really discovered Silicon Valley, venture-backed startups, the idea that people could give you millions of dollars to explore an idea and make something happen without, a huge amount of traditional credibility, right? Before that, all I knew was that you could be a doctor or a scientist or maybe an engineer or of some kind. But being at Stanford really opened my eyes to that new world. And so I jumped right in. I spent, 14 years building and companies, startups, leading product teams, marketing teams, and just sort of doing all these different functions across San Francisco and New York City. Along the way, I started a couple of companies. I started a Y Combinator-backed company in 2011 that I talk about in The Path to Pivot. It was, had an interesting premise, but we failed, and we failed to pivot, and we failed to sort of move the company forward. Having a later company that I started with Wayne that also went through a pivot. It was a bit more successful. We were able to change to a new business area, essentially make a new business almost from scratch, and eventually land and exit into Facebook. And while I was at Facebook, I alongside building products there, I started coaching founders. I started writing about my experiences as an entrepreneur, and left full-time in June of 2023 to start coaching full-time. I now have a roster of about 15 or 16 mostly founders and senior leaders that I work with. And along the way, I sort of crystallized a lot of the tweets and the essays that I've been writing about pivots into a book. And Herbert, this is really special because the very first Interintellect Salon I ever hosted was with you, and this is the reverse. I hosted you as you had your book, Creative Doing, which I have right here on my desk. And it's all about being creative and not just thinking creatively, but doing creatively. And so it's really lovely to be here and to talk about this book and what I've learned and share it with the Interintellect community.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's super helpful, especially to hear the stories of your youth and what really drove you to write The Path to Pivot, and also to start startups and help develop other people. It's really interesting. So in the book, one of the core ideas in it is this framework about pivoting. There's 3 stages. It's align, explore, and commit. It would be great if you could explain each of these stages and what happens during them, how you recognize when to use each one, and maybe what can go wrong as well.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing, by the way, everyone. Jason just also shared a diagram in the chat in case you wanted to have a deeper look.
Yeah, so I have fun making this little visual for the framework, and I think it helps anchor what we're going to talk about. So it's sitting there here for you all. The idea for sort of putting this all together, align, explore, commit, is just a simple way to think about any kind of pivot. There's a lot of frameworks out there, design thinking, diverge, converge. There's a lot of parallels to this. I think what's important about a pivot is, one, recognizing that the status quo is not working. I think that's a really important realization, that the status quo is not taking you where you need to go. In the frame of a venture-backed startup, it is, we have a desire, ambition, maybe even expectation, responsibility based, if we've raised capital, to try to build a company that can become extremely large extremely quickly. That is the entire premise of venture-backed entrepreneurship. So when you see that your company is not on a path that is going to get you there, it is, step one is aligning with everyone involved that this is no longer going to work and that you need to make some significant changes to the business. Once you're aligned on that, the possibility that you're going to have to diverge and sort of shift away from what the status quo is, that kind of unlocks opportunity to explore. And exploration is a sort of a safe, designated space where you're trying new things, you're kind of unmooring yourself from the past, but you haven't fully doubled down on the future. And so this is sort of a limbo state where there's a lot of uncertainty, there is risk, there is, unknown. And the way we think about that exploration period is to really set a frame for yourself and say, we are going to, it's like swimming across the deep end of the pool. You know where the other end is, even though it's scary because the pool is very deep. You know how far you have to go before you can touch land again. And so setting that designated time to explore is really important. And then sort of this final step, commit, is to make that intentional choice to fully sever from the past, kind of make a big announcement about your new direction, really commit, double down, and burn the boats so that you can move forward in that new direction, and do so in a way that doesn't feel arbitrary, doesn't feel kind of confusing or just sort of like bizarre, like out of left field. Making it feel coherent is really important so that everyone, whether it's your own team, your customers, other people who are kind of outside observers into this entire process, feels like it's a coherent activity so that you can be treated with legitimacy as you sort of move in this new direction. So that, I think, hopefully encapsulates at a high level how I think about pivoting, and whether it's a venture-backed startup or your career or something else. These 3 sort of large-scale themes or actions are relevant.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you actually have started 2 startups and you pivoted both of them. You mentioned, well, maybe actually let's start here. Can you tell the story of each of them through the lens of this align, explore, commit framework? Maybe like also dabbling into the endless exploration aspect of the first one, and where things went right for the second one.
Yeah, so with the first company, RideJoy, it was a long distance ride sharing company. I mean, you could see the seeds of our uncertainty from the beginning, because we applied. Oh, Herbert, I lost your video. We applied to Y Combinator with one idea. The partners liked our team, but they didn't really like our idea. We had only sketched it out briefly, and so when we interviewed, we had a different idea, and they accepted us knowing that we would change our idea once we got into YC. We did change our idea when we arrived at YC, and we spent 3 weeks frantically trying to come up with something. We finally aligned on this long distance ride sharing experience of, you're driving already to LA and you can share a seat in your car so you can save money on gas, and have a passenger in the seat or someone who could ride with. So we raised money for that business. This was in the early days of the sharing economy. Airbnb was still very much like an early ramp up. And I mean, it's had a tremendous rise. I mean, even now it's still, I think, emerging to what it can become. But at that time, already people understood it was going to be big. And, rides look like a potential next good sort of asset to be shared in this way. But we had a lot of difficulty getting continued growth. It's hard to tell how many people were really willing to share rides and how many rides were really happening in a long distance capacity where people were willing to sort of open their car up for somebody else. And so at one point we hit a wall where Craigslist, which was a big source of traffic for us, pulled our ability to advertise on their platform. We launched an iPhone app that we had poured a lot of our efforts into. It did not manifest in a lot of growth, even though it seemed like a new channel for us. So all of a sudden we were looking at, wow, we have no new rides on the site. Our site looks really empty. Nobody's going to want to use this anymore because there's nothing here. And so we knew we had to pivot. We knew it was very clear that we couldn't continue with the current direction. I think where we got stuck is we didn't give our team a lot of guidance on how to explore and how to kind of come up with new ideas. We just sort of said, hey, in 2 weeks, we're all just going to pitch new things. And everyone just seemed very concerned and uncomfortable with this. And when we looked at the pitches, they were not very good. We didn't really they were all sort of in different dimensions. So we had a problem. We ended up feeling like we had too many people on the team to try to make this change work. Maybe we just were unsure of ourselves. We laid everybody off with a little bit of severance. We laid everyone off and we went back to just the 3 of us co-founders. Now, the problem is once we did that, we sort of relieved ourselves of one problem, which is we had a ticking clock, a lot of employees, a lot of burn. We wouldn't be able to last for a very long time. With just the 3 of us living in our own apartments, no longer having the office lease, we actually had a pretty extended runway, which means we didn't have a lot of pressure to make a new decision. And we were all gun shy about making a new decision. So I think that was all sort of scary. And it also, we relieved one fear for ourselves, but then created a kind of trap that we couldn't climb out of, because we could always sort of say, well, this idea isn't that great, and we have time and we have money, so we can just keep looking. And so we did that for months and months and months. And so finally, I was the first one to say, I can't do this anymore. It just feels like I'm going to spend my 20s sitting in this apartment, like spitballing ideas that we never really do anything with. And that didn't feel like a satisfying way to spend my time. And so rather than kind of like challenging everybody to saying like, let's double down or I kind of took the coward's way out, and I applied to a job that I ended up getting. And then that kind of gave me an excuse to slink out of the company. And then, a month later, the company, we just decided to shut down altogether. So that was the failure, I think, in that first business. We clearly, we wanted to do a business more than we wanted to do solve a particular problem. And that, it can be good if you're really committed to that premise of starting a big profitable company. I tell the story of Nouveau Cargo and the founder who pivoted from a hiring company into a trucking cross-border company. But he was very much like, I want to build a big company, period. But I don't know if me and my co-founders were as dialed into that ambition. So we were like, we want to do something, but it has to be something we like and we think is good for the world and that we think is creative. And, you know, we had all these sort of extra criteria that probably hurt us. So that was the first company. Second company was 5 years later. You know, I do my time in DC. I moved to New York. I work at a couple companies. I started working at Etsy as a product manager. That's when I met Wayne, who's here, and he was an engineer on the team that I was working with at Etsy. You know, I found out that he had started a company as well that was doing data to sell to hedge funds around like aggregating short sellers and their positions as a new source of proprietary kind of like information that they could use to have an edge. So that was really interesting to me. Found that out very serendipitously because his wife was him and his wife were in a story in the New York Times about apartment hunting. And so in the apartment hunting story, there was like a little snippet about him being an entrepreneur, and they were shared in our company Slack. And I was like, ooh, interesting. Okay, this guy is, you know, not just an engineer, he's entrepreneurial. And so that kind of perked me up. And we had a lot of you know, good collaborative spirit, and I felt like he could be a good partner. So we started to talk about the possibility of working together. Eventually did quit and started working on a business, a hiring company that we thought could improve the hiring process, both for technical talent and for employers who are trying to weed through many resumes and many interviews. That business was called Headlight. We iterated from just doing software, pure software, to a software plus, you know, add-on services, ultimately even going as far as running tournaments ourselves and presenting candidates to hiring managers and trying to get a cut of the recruiting fee. So we sort of tried all the different business models. And ultimately, you know, we felt like, okay, this makes some money, but this is a very hands-on business and it's not very technology enabled. And we weren't really satisfied with it. We didn't feel that it was the kind of venture scale business we wanted to build. So we ultimately had a 1 week period where one of our employees was out of town, out of the office. So we could kind of just like speak furtively without having to like tip her off that something weird was going on. We had another contractor who was in Australia, who was also from Etsy. So he wasn't around to see us kind of doing this. We said, okay, let's take this week and really like push ourselves. So we had this kind of like deadline. And the other thing we did is we set a day on Friday of that week where we invited all our friends and advisors of the company and people that whose opinions we trusted to say, we're going to present a bunch of ideas to you. We want your take on this. So I think we sort of stumbled into one of the things that I suggest, which is like really challenging yourself to have a short time window. We also didn't raise as much money. And so we didn't have as much money on hand. So we sort of knew like, we got to make a decision about this. So we presented ideas still in hiring. We presented completely different ideas in esports and gaming and AI tooling for gamers. And we had a bunch of different comments, but I think one of them really stuck with me. Wayne, you know, if you're there, I'm curious to know what you thought of that meeting and whether you have other thoughts about what caused us to pivot. But someone said to us, like, you know, we could just tell that you were really fired up about some of the gaming and esports ideas. Like you kind of presented the other ones and sure, logically it made sense and it sounds good on paper. You have background in this, but that was something that we really saw you light up about. And, you know, to me, that was one of the big things that kind of encouraged me to try to change into that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, apologies. I have another little one with me. I think at that point it was really like the height of esports, and so I don't know if anyone followed esports around that time, but you know, this was roughly the time when like League of Legends was like blowing up, and it was extremely popular, and people were getting paid, you know, multi-million-dollar salaries, and it was looking like it was going to be roughly like, you know, the next major sport, which, you know, it still might be obviously, but I think the market has cooled on that a little bit. But this was definitely like the height of that. And you know, Jason, I think at one point you talked quite a bit about, you know, it's always good to be riding a wave of something, right? Like a new trend. And for me, that was like, hey, this is getting really hot. Like we should, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of attention being paid to it. Let's take a look at it seriously.
Yeah, and I think there was something about the fact that there were collegiate esports teams that got me really interested because it seemed like a channel that could create a lot of distribution for us because, you know, you could get in with these colleges. Colleges are how a lot of social products spread. And so there was something really interesting about that. And having been a collegiate athlete myself, I saw a lot of parallels. So I think that's right. There was something about this like possibility for a new distribution channel, and we kind of having like an entry point that was underappreciated. So anyway, we come back, our employee comes back on Monday. She's like, surprise, we're like, surprise, we want to change what we're doing. But we didn't have a super long runway. So we were like, we got to raise new money for this. And if not, in a couple months, we're all, going home anyway. Hey, Trey, great to see you here. And so we ultimately pushed ourselves to evolve the business, tested a bunch of different ideas, kind of continued that exploration phase with the commitment of like, this is what we want to do. Ultimately, we're able to land some new funding from Techstars, Alexa, which was like an Amazon-backed Techstars program for voice applications. It also created a new deadline and a new like social structure of like a 10-week period where we're going to try to really rapidly develop the business. So I think that was really important for us. And again, something that kind of like I talk about in the book of how do you sort of create momentum and create energy and accountability for this change that you're doing. So that kind of like that's what sealed our transition into the new business of mid-game, building AI tools for gamers. And we still iterated a couple different times inside of that business, but it was like under the umbrella of like AI, voice, tools for gamers, esports teams, casual gamers, competitive gamers. It was all kind of felt still in the same bucket. And ultimately, the acquisition was not a huge outcome. Our investors didn't toast us with champagne at the end of that, but it was COVID, and there was not a lot of great options out there right at the time. And I don't think raising another round of funding was feasible for where we were at. And so we were just grateful to kind of keep the team together and be able to kind of land the ship, on the ground without it exploding on impact.
That's amazing. I mean, Jason, I think like one of the qualities that I personally like about you, and I'm sure many people do as well, is your humility. Selling a company to Facebook is by no means like it's not, it's an outcome that a lot of people, myself included, would be very proud of, and I know you are as well in many ways. So huge kudos. I think the power of telling both those stories, I think, is in seeing how you've matured, personally, professionally, and you were able to drive change, where once the first time it was very difficult, there was this obstacle, there were these setbacks, and you weren't quite sure how to approach it. But the second time, you pulled it off, and Faye, that's a great point. It's landing a plane well into meta. So I think I think that's an incredible story, and it's the insights you got from that helped you to set the foundation for this framework, but also for the path to pivot. And so I think like this might be an interesting time to kind of talk about this is a bit sequentially, it's a bit later in the book, but I do want to talk a bit about the shift in emotion or identity that an entrepreneur needs to make when they're facing the potential of needing to make a pivot, right? You kind of approached it quite differently the first time and the second time. And I'd love to hear about, how you conceptualized all of that and how you worked through it.
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the pieces of advice that you'll see tossed around in entrepreneurship is don't let your company become your identity. It's very easy for that to be the case, especially early on when you don't have a lot of professional identity. When you're 24 years old, you don't have many jobs under your belt. You don't have a lot under your belt. Like this company is like the biggest thing to your name. So it's easy to feel that way. And I think we certainly felt that way. We had like this whole magazine article come out in Vanity Fair, and it said like, who wants to be a billionaire? And it's like the YC partners, Dropbox founders, and then us in a Tesla back when Tesla was like very exciting and cool and new. And so it's like cars, we're in the thing, sharing rides with our t-shirt and all that stuff. So it was very painful to kind of like lose that source of status and recognition and to say, we don't know what we're doing. We're not doing that anymore. I think in the second company, I had a stronger ambition to say, like, I want to build a company and sort of take another swing at this. I've been building towards this for a number of years. Like the first one kind of came so easy. Like me and my co-founders just applied and overnights and weekends. You know, we got in while we were still employed at other places, and we got money right away. We sort of immediately got this on-ramp into Silicon Valley sort of entrepreneurship. The second time, you know, I was actually laid off from my company. So I was actually, you know, working without a job, freelancing, just trying to start this business, you know, doing, you know, GA classes to make a little bit of money. I think Wayne was still working somewhere else at the time. And then eventually he quit. And so we felt like we had to grind a lot harder just to get onto the starting line of this business. I think we appreciated the opportunity more. And I think we also recognized that, like, even if this idea doesn't work, we'd rather do something than nothing. And we were also older. We were sort of late 20s, getting into our 30s, and saying, like, you know, if this doesn't work, we probably don't have that many more chances to swing at this for a while at least. And so I think we appreciated it that much more. And I think one of the things I'm working at, you know, I work with clients now who are pivoting. I have a client who is in the middle of a pivot. They had an idea, they raised money for that idea, they were building that idea for a while, and then they kind of similarly realized, like, oh, this isn't the kind of business we want to build. It works, but it's not like so fast growing, so tech oriented, and they've spent a bunch of time in the kind of pivot hell swirling. And so, you know, some of the work we're doing now is how do you build back your confidence in yourself, in your product, because I think they've come up with a bunch of different ideas in the past, but then discarded them. So it makes it hard to sort of say, like, well, this idea is really the one. You don't want to be the boy who cried wolf again and again, saying this is the one, and it's not really the one. So then you kind of become a little too gun shy. And we got stuck a little bit in that ourselves with RideJoy. And the way I'm trying to think about it is to deepen the confidence, not in a particular product or a particular direction, but in your identity as an entrepreneur, or in your identity as a sort of creative, adaptive professional, right? That is a core identity that doesn't change from business to business, from, you know, role to role, job to job. It's that sort of more enduring identity of, like, you're someone who can figure it out. You're someone who's resourceful. And if this doesn't work, you'll figure out what does work. If this isn't the right product, you'll build the right product. And by building your confidence in that, it doesn't sort of completely disintegrate if you change direction, because it's still kind of like coherent, like, well, changing directions is part of what a resourceful entrepreneur does, or creative professional does. They adapt. So I think that's an important part of this, you know, change in your identity.
That resonates with me so much. I think that sense of confidence, you know, the Paul Graham, who founded Y Combinator, you were in the photo together, is a legendary photo, but he wrote about that too. It's about keeping your identity small, right? Not attaching too many labels to yourself. And so that way it keeps you flexible and ready to shift gears and change paths as you need. And I do really appreciate your point on deepening your identity as a person who's creative, adaptive, and professional. That can be under the guise of your own company. It could also be under the guise of a job or a different type of practice. So tell me a little bit more about your career pivot. You know, you've now sold the company to Meta. Maybe you're a year or two in. And you're interested in coaching. You've, like, developed this coaching practice. What's the story there, and how does that fit into the align, explore, commit framework?
Yeah, I'll tell this story, and then maybe we'll use this as a, you know, sort of transition into whether or not we want to kind of like jump into other people's stories here. I've been curious about coaching for a long time. I think when I saw my mom coach gymnasts, I thought, like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. You have to, like, work with people for so many years for the chance that they maybe have a success down the road, and so many people quit along the way. It's very physically taxing. So I didn't think that, you know, athletic coaching was for me, but even as early as like 2010, 2011, I discovered there were other kinds of coaches who coached in different capacities. And I worked with a life coach in my 20s. And I was like, wow, in 20-minute phone calls every other week, like we can like, this person is helping me think through problems in my career, problems in my personal life, problems in all these different areas of my life. And I really appreciated that. Years later, with mid-game and headlighted mid-game, I did hire an executive coach who was actually someone in my YC cohort. He had sold his, he had a startup, and then he had his family business, and he sold his family business. He shut down the startup, but he sold his family business, and he had started coaching. And so I hired him. He was Asian American man, a little bit older than me, had been a Harvard, law school educated lawyer before this. So I looked up to him, and I worked with him for 4 years. He really helped keep my head on straight as I was thinking about leaving Etsy and then, raising money and then pivoting the company and then selling the company. He sort of saw me through 4 years of change and transition. And that's when I was really like, oh, this is really, lovely that he's doing this basically full-timers. It was sort of his main job. And I had a few friends who were, a product manager, entrepreneur turned coach, or an investor turned coach. And I sort of saw these people taking this path, and I said, oh, this is really a viable path for people like me, people who are around my age and around my sort of professional success level. Like, sure, that the former CEO of Etsy is also an executive coach, but he took a company public. I'm certainly not him. I won't be able to charge his rates. I won't be able to work with clients that maybe he would work with. But what I've done is relevant and interesting enough that I could make a living out of doing this. So what I started doing was putting my own name out there, offering to coach people. I got my first paid client at the end of 2020, just worked with one client for most of 2021. Then in 2022, I picked up a couple more clients. Then in 2023, a couple more. And, it still wasn't like break even or like I had enough, but it was like to the point where I was like, I enjoy doing this. It is very hard to grow this business while working full time at Facebook, where you have all these meetings and you have all these things going on. There's not a lot of extra slots to kind of like hold space for people. And I knew that I wanted to start a family. Wayne had started a family while we were at Meta. And I was like, if I want to go at another business of any kind, I better get to its stat. I don't want to be trying to start a business while also raising a newborn. So I said, I got to start now, give myself a year head start. If we get this a kid, and my wife and I are currently trying for a child, I'll either have enough of a momentum with this business that it will work, or I could try to slide back into, paid work and get parental leave and all those things. But one way or another, I won't feel like I just kind of like didn't have enough time to even get something going. So that was sort of my thinking and my decision to go full time with coaching. And I've been really grateful to do that. For full transparency, I think I'm like, this month might be the first month where I completely break even on all the expenses in my life and in my business, everything, sort of my mortgage and all that, going out and what comes in the door, which is a big milestone. But that's just the very beginning, right? 1 month of doing that, getting that consistent, getting some kind of buffer, paying your taxes, all those important things. But it feels like this bet is paying off, and I can see the pathway to really doing this long term. So I'm really grateful for that. And this book is certainly a part of one of the investments I'm making in my coaching career, to have something that is, a definitive guide that can help a lot of people and potentially generate business for my practice, speaking opportunities, other opportunities.
That's huge. Wow, you heard it here first. I feel like that was quite an announcement. Congratulations, Jason. That's amazing. As you suggested, I think it could be a good time to open the floor up a little bit and see if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about some of their other stories, or thoughts and ideas that might have come to mind as Jason was sharing. So I'll open the floor up.
I have a question for Jason. In listening to you tell those stories, I really just felt a lot of appreciation that you went into the detail that you did with them. And a lot of times we sense there's a need to pivot. And sometimes you're lucky and you have an idea and you're ready to go. And other times, like you were explaining, you really need an idea, a good idea, and you don't have it. You may have some money, but you may not have the idea, right? So that whole notion of exploring is really interesting to me. What approaches and maybe tools and methodologies we use at that point, I find really interesting. As you work with people and as you wrote the book, I was just wondering, when people are dealing with that situation and the risk and the pressure of it and the uncertainty, do you find that people make the mistake, if it's a mistake, to rush the decision, or do they find ways to avoid making the decision, being gun shy, like you said? We're all human beings. There's different risks of errors. Which do you see more often is the case?
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a broad generalization about like how people tend to act in the case of needing to change and maybe not knowing what to change. I think in general, if people don't have an idea of what to go to, they tend to not change. And if they have an idea of what to go to, or they're really antsing to do something, they maybe change too soon. So I think that's like one of it's like if people want to do something versus nothing. And if nothing, if something is we keep doing what we're doing versus just explore randomly other stuff, that sounds, the something of the status quo sounds better. If it's like keep doing what we're doing or do this exciting new thing that we've been thinking about and seems really cool, then maybe the new thing is like the gravity is drawing that way. And to your earlier point, I think when you don't have an idea, I sort of have a chapter on this called Leverage Your Assets, which is really actually it's kind of the chapter name kind of expresses two different ideas. The first is looking inwards and saying, what have we developed or what do we know that is valuable outside of the current context? Do we have a brand in a particular area that is valuable? Do we have a list of users that could be sold something different? Do we have have we figured out a way to market in a new channel, like the esports thing? If one product doesn't work, we could sell them something else. Or is it the technology of the product that we've developed that could be applied into a new situation, right? Trying to make a list of the things that we have that are difficult to acquire and valuable, or things that we understand about the world or how to do things that other people don't have, essentially intellectual assets. And starting from there to try to brainstorm is one way. That's sort of the inside out. The other way is the outside in, which is to say, what is changing about the world? What is going on right now that is new, that is kind of like other people aren't in a position to maybe leverage, or they'd have to really break their current method or system or approach in order to capitalize on, but you're kind of like more willing to throw away the old stuff. That is another sort of opportunity for you to get into something new. So I think those are sort of the two ways that I like to think about it.
That's very interesting. That was a great question as well, Faye. I know in the book you write about, I mean, the whole chapter is actually about leveraging your assets. And I think you highlighted two startups in particular, Loom and Discord, that made respectively, Loom leveraged their product, Discord like came across an insight to make a successful pivot. What makes this challenging for entrepreneurs to do? Is it a sense of like myopia, like you can't, you're too close to it, right? Like what are some tips and tricks you have for stepping outside of that and being able to see things more clearly?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I've been thinking about this a lot from my own coaching clients, where often when folks come to me, they sometimes are a little bit down on their confidence. And one of the activities that I have people do is I have them do what's sometimes called reflected best self exercise, or sometimes called zone of genius, where you actually go and talk to the people that you've worked with or interacted with at different points in your life, and you ask them to sort of tell you either over email or over a phone call, like you kind of do user research on yourself. And you say, like, where have you seen me really be at my best, be really fully alive, fully engaged, doing a lot of good work, helping people, where I seem really happy. And you try to collect that from a wide variety of sources so that you can kind of triangulate for yourself, maybe what they see. So it's easy to dismiss what we think we're good at because it comes easily to us, and so we don't struggle with it, and so we just say, like, oh, that's not a big deal, everyone can do that. And it's like, well, no, everyone can't do that. But you need somebody to tell you that, because that wouldn't otherwise be so obvious. I wonder if there's actually a version of that for a business. I mean, I think it's a little bit harder because you need people who are like in your business, like who can witness your business but aren't necessarily you know directly working at your business to kind of have that perspective. So sometimes those are customers, sometimes it could be your investors, advisors, not to plug coaching, but sometimes a coach can be that for you, that lens, that mirror. And so I think that's there's a phrase that goes, it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle. And I think this is an example of where that comes into play.
I love that phrase. I think it's very true. I I saw a bunch of folks turn the camera on during this part of the session, so I figured other folks might have some more questions. So please feel free to ask Jason.
I had one that going from a story you told earlier, I think it might have been the first startup you did. Um, and I also apologize, I've been in and out. Have a sick child that just been checking in on. Anyway, the first startup you mentioned that the when you told everybody we were going to pivot and come up with ideas, and that didn't really go so well. Then you ended up laying everybody off just to get back to the three co-founders. Um, how hard was it to lay everybody off? I know you said severance and all that, but still, you still had to lay them off. And I was wondering, was that your first experience? But then also getting back to the pivot side of it, do you think that was the right thing to do, and that's generally easier when it's smaller number of people to pivot, or does it go either way? It's hard to do no matter what.
Yeah, looking back on that decision, it's easy in hindsight to think, oh, if I knew now, what would I do? But if I had to think about how we were thinking about it then, I think a couple of things. One, we probably could have stuck to the idea a little bit longer, or in the book I talk about grit, pivot, or quit. And so grit is sort of like basically sticking with it and recognizing that sometimes you just have to sort of push through difficult times to kind of get an advantage. Quit is when it's like so terrible that like you can't imagine, doing this for another week or two or three, and then you want this to be over. And so pivot is somewhere in the middle where it's like, you really can't see yourself doing this, but maybe you can do something else. I think we were maybe a little bit too quick to just, throw in the towel with the existing idea and the existing team. I think it makes sense to say, well, we don't know what new ideas we might come up with, and we might not, they might not be the right fit for that new business that we want to do. That is reasonable. And it is true that, trying to get consensus from a larger team is hard. I think part of it is that we cultivated a very consensus-oriented organization, maybe too much so. And so it would have been hard to just change on a dime and be like, hey, we're doing this. if you don't like it, too bad. And like, also, you know, this might not be a good place for you anymore. So in some ways, I think we were trying to preempt our fear that we might like have that kind of a situation show up, and kind of like cut everybody off before we even know anything. So it doesn't feel personal. It doesn't feel like, oh, hey, you can stay, but you can't stay, you know, kind of decisions, which maybe is our own sort of lack of experience as managers, a lot of other things. So I do think we could have stuck at it longer. It is hard to kind of to change and get consensus, especially if you don't have like a kind of disagree and commit sort of culture. And you know, Wayne, you're back on. I wonder if you want to weigh in on this. We sort of ended up doing something. We did phase out that one employee that, or you know, actually both of the folks that we had on the team. One of them a little bit more of a contract, sort of mutual. One of them was a little bit more like, this is, yeah, this is just not working with the kind of your skills and what the business needs. I see you're
Yeah, I
also
mean,
trying to, yeah.
I think like when you decide, when you make that hard decision, right, to pivot, then you're already sort of committing to making hard decisions. And so like, you know, I won't take credit for it. You obviously did the very hard job of actually laying that employee off. And I'm sure that must have been a difficult conversation for sure. But I think once you're committed to making that difficult conversation, other difficult conversations actually become a little bit easier because you're already like in that mindset.
Yeah, and Trey, I'll you know, actually, while we're all here, Kevin, while you're here, I'm gonna like ask everyone to like just look at your camera for a second. Usually they like to have us take pictures, so I gotta remember to do this and smile into the camera. We'll do, that was one. We'll do one more. Hold on just a second. 1, 2, 3. Hi. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Thank you. I always forget sometimes, and so we gotta have proof that this event happened. So yeah, and Trey, to your point about laying people off, you know, I think it was a different time in 2012. You know, tech was still on the rise. Yes. I think right now we see a lot of people being laid off, and a lot of a very long time frame before people can be sort of find new jobs. I think at that time it didn't feel as bad. Rents in the Bay Area were still high, but not as high as they are now. You know, we did invest in trying to talk about our team members and say, hey, these are really great people who could go somewhere else. And I think we arranged for most of them to find jobs not too long after. You know, I think we gave them, you know, between 1 to 3 months of severance. And so, you know, like I think most people didn't have more than a month or two after that before they were back on their feet doing something else. So it isn't the way it is now, but I do also think that in some ways, maybe we projected too much certainty around what we were doing initially, instead of being like, oh, you know, this is very uncertain and unknown. This is a startup. Who knows what will happen? So that people are already kind of like pre-oriented to significant change of this kind. Well, thanks, Herbert, for sharing my article about getting laid off. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, I mean, Trey, that was a good question. It sounds like it's a really hard thing to do. And I mean, right or wrong, it's like what the company needs, right? It's like, hey, if we're going to survive, let alone thrive, the current path isn't getting us there. And so you got to do difficult things to change that. I'll keep the uncomfortable silence for a little longer. I think it's uncomfortable, but it does create a nice white space for people to ask questions and pop some ideas out. So I'm gonna have a sip of water real fast, but please feel free to
I
ask
have
your
a
question.
I have a quick follow-up that I'm reminded of. And so, but if anybody has a question, please jump in. But this was about 20 years ago, when I was in grad school or taking classes at GW in DC. And anyway, the CEO of Mont Blanc at the time came to speak, and I forget what their pivot was exactly at this point, so long ago. But it was he changed the company, and I remember part of it had to do with price rises, like raising the prices of everything they offered by a lot, and just totally redoing it and picking up new products and some other stuff. And I was just like, how hard was that? And I remember he had this interesting response that stuck with me. He says,
once it was clear that what we were doing beforehand wasn't working, it wasn't hard at all. It wasn't a choice. But anyway, that was so long ago and kind of different than I would imagine some of the things you've talked about. So I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I do, Faye, you were talking a little bit about pivoting as a larger organization, and I've tried to capture stories of pivots from larger organizations as well. It's very hard because it's hard to, they rarely are so crisply done and well done that you can point to an unmitigated success. The two examples I tend to sort of point to, one are Intel, which was a long time ago, and Adobe, which is a little bit more recent. Intel, of course, was a memory chip producer and was one of the biggest memory chip producers on the planet in the, I think, late 70s, early 80s. And, then they started getting a ton of competition from Japanese manufacturers who were very competitive on price, and they were unable to sort of compete. There was this whole debate about whether they should keep trying to win in the memory chip business. They'd lost a lot of market share and all that good stuff. And then they, eventually do pivot into the CPUs. They had to lay off about a third of the company during that time. So that was like thousands of people, which was obviously very difficult for the company, but it paved the way for the business to be successful. And it was obviously very clear that there was, a lot at stake, like as much as a third of the company is bad, like it's better than the entire company, which looked very possible given the kind of like, people who were failing left and right. Adobe, more interesting because I think it was less burning platform, but Adobe was selling shrink wrap software, hundreds of dollars at a piece. There's a lot of pirating of software, and that was like a concern. And like, you didn't know when you released the new version if people were going to pay for it. So you kind of are making this big bet on version 7, version 8. And so when they pivot into, cloud-based subscription, I think there's like a very proactive move. I'm very impressed by how well they were able to kind of transition into the cloud, and, bundling and sort of cloud enabled you to be like, oh, well, for $20 more, you can get all these other pieces of software too, which would have been crazy in the shrink wrap software world, but like was more possible because, hey, if you, it's just different, mechanics, different economics for the business, but the company was able to really manage that transition pretty smoothly. And I think, not like, I don't want to say not enough credit, but they certainly deserve a lot of credit for what they did there.
Definitely. I mean, to your earlier point, I thought what was really, I remembered reading, I think it was Andy Grove's High Output Management. And it was either that or one of the articles he wrote, but he was saying to his, I think he was CEO, the other person was president. And they're like, hey, like, what do you think the new CEO is going to do if they replaced us tomorrow? And they're like, well, they'd obviously get out of the line of business we're in. They'd go into memories. And so like, oh, maybe we should just do that ourselves. Like maybe we shouldn't wait to have someone else come in and do this. I always thought that was really interesting. I hadn't realized they had to let go such a significant portion of the company, but it worked out, right? I mean, looking back now, I do wonder about kind of like little practices like that, right? Where you mentioned the book about fighting your brain. I would love to hear about practices that people can do to step out of the focus they're in and to make that hard decision. And just a heads up, I do need to run to the bathroom again, but please, I think that's like an interesting thought starter.
Yeah. So fighting your brain is definitely a part of this book. We know that we have cognitive biases that keep us sort of stuck to the status quo, and kind of have a hard time letting go of sunk costs, right? So, one of the whole idea of like, well, if we were to swap out with somebody else, what would that other person do? The next person who doesn't have the sunk costs, right? Basically, that's what that thought experiment is doing, because that person didn't make that other decision. So they get the opportunity to have a fresh slate, right? And so so that's one idea, is like you swap out you for somebody else. Another one is like, how would you advise somebody else who's in your shoes, in your position, right? If you had a mentee or someone that you were advising, what would you tell them to do in your situation? And to think, in gymnastics, we had this idea of, you had this competition and you had 6 events, and each event you'd kind of rotate one at a time. And it was easy for people to get caught up if you messed up on one event, to be like, oh, well, my entire competition is screwed and everything's bad. And so we were talking about this idea of like every event is a new competition. Every event is sort of a chance to reset and start over. And so you can also think of that in your business, like every day, every year, every quarter is a chance to kind of reset and start over and say, like, maybe this moment of the business, this arc of the business is over, and you're starting a new arc today, right? That season is over, a season of television, season of life. Yeah, I think those are all really, effective ways of thinking about it. I don't know if people, maybe here have their own thoughts of how they've been able to do that.
I don't, but if anyone doesn't have anything, I have a somewhat transition question.
Sure.
By the way,
I think the interesting thing about Headlight was that, like, sorry, 1 second. The interesting thing about Headlight is that we weren't really in any danger of like going out of business. We were making enough money that first year that like we could have been revenue neutral at some point, right? And I think it's easy to align on a pivot when things are not going well. But in our case, things were going okay. It just wasn't clear if they were going to go great. And so I know how I felt about it. I'd love to hear more about how you thought about that pivot, given that like that could have been a revenue neutral business in like year 1 or 2, which is pretty good, all things considered.
Yeah. I do think about that, because I think, like, is it so, in today's environment, a lot of us are thinking like, man, a business that can make money without having to spend a lot of money, like, hey, not bad. Although, maybe hiring wouldn't have been an effective business in this environment either. So even if we had something that made, large sums of money, I think it was frustrating to feel like we weren't really changing the industry, that we were sort of bowing back to the original gravity and the physics of the business. I remember when we were trying to do RideJoy, we met with the founder of Zipcar, who had started essentially a version of RideJoy several years earlier, and she was like, "Don't do it. It won't work. It's really hard. We tried." And we were like, "Whatever, lady, like, we're better than you. We can do this." And then, we had to face the exact same, it's like, there's just like a graveyard up ahead. You just see all these cars crash, and we're like, we won't crash though. And then you crash your car in the exact same place. And I think the same thing felt true in the hiring space, where it was like, well, there's a bunch of ways to make money, but I think someone said this to me, like, you ultimately end up turning into a recruiting agency. Someone said that to me, right? Because they started some other kind of business, and then it was kind of turning into that. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I had that in my mind. And then, like, sooner or later, we sort of like found ourselves in that position of building a recruiting agency where we take a success fee, and it's like a percentage of the salary, which is a big chunk of money if they last, but it's like very delayed. And you're just like managing these contracts with people and keeping track of if someone has like stayed at the job, for 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, and like negotiating the percentage of the salary. So it just felt like a very tedious business to be in, and I have ADHD, and I think one of the things was like, this is not exciting. This is not like a business that's like making me feel proud of, like, yeah, I built this like super labor intensive, hand holding business that generates money. I think the part that was most fun was the tournaments that we were running. And I think we had a lot of creative ideas about how to like make them interesting for people to participate in. There were prizes, kind of like a game show, like a little trivia HQ, but for hiring kind of energy. So there were some fun things and some creativity about that. So I won't sort of deny that, but it did feel like every day you had to go out there and start a new tournament and launch a new thing and come up with a new idea, and there was no like momentum really being built. And so all of that, I think, made it frustrating to want to keep going. I don't know, Wayne, if that's exactly kind of what you were going for.
Yeah, I mean, I think the like, I don't know if I want to run a recruiting agency thing looms large in my mind, but I also think, to your point, there's some question of like, do we have any momentum? Do we have any moat from doing this? Like, is this even ultimately a venture scale business, or sort of the things that ran through my mind? But, I think, to allude to your earlier question, right? Like, these are some interesting questions as far as pivoting goes too, right? Like, do I even want to run this business if it's successful? Like, that could be a good inflection point.
It's a good question to ask. Like, is this, if this works, will you be happy? Right. And if, right, sometimes you're just like, I just want this to work. But then you don't really think about like, well, will you like it if it does kind of work, we'll be satisfied with that. And I think a related point to like trying to get people to make the change is raising your own bar for what's acceptable. Some, I talk about in the book, like you start out, you have these big ideas, you have this big dream, and then it's hard and nothing works. And then you finally get something that kind of like works even a little bit. And you're like, well, I kind of want to hold on to that because this feels better than when nothing was working at all. But it's sort of like, yeah, but this is not going to a place where you're going to be really happy about it. And like, that's not like, this sort of mediocre outcome is not good enough. And you need to sort of like raise your own expectations and standards and say like, I will not accept this. And I'm willing to endure more sort of struggle and maybe some suffering and pain in order to get this like the chance at a higher and better outcome. This is true for anything, like whether it's like dating a sort of partner that doesn't really make you happy, or living somewhere that you don't really like and kind of is like a drag to live in. Like all of these things, I think it's important to take that time to kind of like raise your own bar.
It really, Wayne and Jason, both of what you were talking about really connects with one of the earlier ideas in the book, which is about zombie startups, right? What you call zombie startups, Jason. I mean, it would be a great time now to kind of dive into what exactly a zombie startup is and maybe how you recognize one. Although maybe the points both of you had made already are good ways to recognize one.
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit, and then Tassin, you haven't shared anything, so maybe I'll kind of like plant that seed for if there's something you want to ask or add to the discussion. But yeah, a zombie startup is a term that was coined by Elle Morrell, who is an entrepreneur and started a couple different companies, has been an investor herself. She used it to describe the business that she was running that was neither dead nor alive. It was sort of going, but not going anywhere really. And I think one of the first chapters is like Shoot the Zombie, is all about sort of not accepting this like mediocre half dead, half alive state and sort of committing to a better outcome. So that's really it, is just saying, zombie startups are a state of mediocrity that we don't want to accept. And therefore we must kind of like kill because and that there is some pain in that, but by freeing yourself from that, you can kind of move forward. Yeah, Kevin also, yeah, you've been in and out, but Tassin, maybe turning this over to you.
So yeah, I have a very broad question, Jason. So and I want to ask whether you're pivoting, right, or whether you're starting something new, or whether something you said earlier in the discussion, like going against the status quo. So, like, how much of it is intuition? How much of it is like out of pure belief in yourself? How much of it is data driven? Or like, how do you approach trying new things?
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, when it comes to entrepreneurship, the risk of success is low to get a big outcome, right? And you sort of start with the premise that you're trying to do something that's very hard, that many people fail to do, even if they get some seed capital. And there's statistics that 1 in 40 companies that have raised, maybe $1 to $2 million will become worth $1 billion at any point in their life, which isn't like bad, but that means 39, everyone here plus like 5 other rooms would not make it for one person to make it, right? And these are all smart, hardworking, talented founders doing that. So in entrepreneurship, you have to kind of start from the premise like you'll be okay even if this doesn't work at all. And I think this is true in your life too. Like, it's obviously a little bit more, the stakes are higher, and so it's not so easy to say like, yeah, it's okay if you decide to move to another country and try to find some exciting job and then you just can't do it. Like, there are real risks to doing that, and that can put you in a place that is hard to recover from. So I think that that's worth saying. I think part of building confidence is incremental, right? You take a small bet on yourself, and then you take a bigger bet, and then you take a bigger bet, right? You say, hey, let me try to, build something overnights and weekends. And if that goes well, I'm going to invest in it further. Like this coaching practice, right? I didn't just find out like, oh, executive coaching is cool. Well, I quit my job to do that. Like I got 1 client, and for a year, all I had was 1 client. And then I had 4 clients, and then I had like 6 clients. And, I had enough money saved from being at Meta for a number of years to be like, okay, I could do this for a year. And if that doesn't work, I didn't, it will be hard to get a new job, but I still believe in myself enough to probably try to find a job. And I won't make no money, so I'll make enough money that I could like spread between making money from coaching and my savings to do that. I obviously would hurt. And I have spent a bunch of my savings on this. So, right, I haven't, even if I get to break even, it will be at a sort of net loss compared to if I just stayed at Meta, right? So mathematically, I'm still down, right, compared to if I just stayed at Meta. But I think happiness wise, I'm much happier. So that accounts for a lot. But yeah, I think you have to kind of incrementally bet on yourself. And then when you do take a loss, you do have to lick your wounds a little bit and sort of, do something a little bit safer and lower risk to kind of build up your capacity and your confidence again. Like the client that I was telling you about who kind of changed directions a bunch of different times, kind of has lost confidence. Let's take baby steps, right? Talk about your business in the present tense without caveating it. When you see people sort of take that seriously, that's a step in the right direction. Close 1 customer. That can give you more confidence in the business, right? Like you sort of step by step forward. I don't know if that was what you were hoping for, Tassin, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, it's a good answer, right? I'm just trying to get your views on things. So
Jason, we have a question from Kevin. I'm not sure if
Yes.
but he was asking basically how you figured out pivoting around pricing for your coaching and how inbound versus outbound has worked out for you. And then a second question, but we can get to that one after.
Yeah, pricing around coaching. I'm lucky enough to have gotten some feedback around like where the market is in terms of coaching pricing. I think it really varies, but I currently, roughly speaking, charge $2,000 a month for venture-backed founders who've raised, $1 or more million in funding. And I charge, $1,000 to $1,500 to bootstrap founders or individuals who are in the middle of a transition. And this is on a per monthly basis. I don't charge per session. I like to do sort of this monthly retainer rate. I don't like to have people thinking about like on a per session basis, like how much money they're spending. Even though my own coach previously did do that on a per call basis, he would just charge you after the call, and so it was sort of like use at your own will, right? I wanted to establish more of a relationship with my clients and sort of have this consistency and say like, hey, we're gonna work together for at least a couple months. And in terms, so that's sort of how I got there. I know that 2000 is sort of around that, 2000 or 350 an hour per session is around where people have netted out 350 plus for sort of seed stage, and then like maybe 500 plus for Series A. So then you start to think about, okay, how do I trade up from there to clients who are, Series A, or, companies that are bigger and have bigger budgets for kind of HR spent expense on coaching. And then in terms of inbound and outbound, it's definitely a bit of both. Early on, one of the best things I did is I emailed everyone in my network, or I would email 20 people every week in my network, letting them know that I quit Meta, I was coaching now, and I was offering these free sort of like vision mapping 2-hour sessions to people who fit this kind of criteria as a gift. Sometimes people refer their friends. Sometimes they raise their own hand and be like, well, what about me? And I could continue doing that, although it started to sort of reach its capacity, as most of the people who I personally know have already gotten this email. And now I'm like emailing people I haven't, I added on LinkedIn like 10 years ago. And so it's less, response rates are lower. I do a lot of posting on LinkedIn. I do a lot of, I write a weekly newsletter. I don't know if my weekly newsletter gets anybody, no one directly has come from that, although I think people who look at the newsletter get a sense of who I am and what I'm interested in. And so that's been effective as sort of like a soft sales kind of material to kind of get people to kind of believe in working with me. And then now I'm kind of doing some more outreach to Y Combinator founders. There's just so many founders that are backed at each year that, as an alumni of the program and having now worked with a couple YC founders as clients, I have a pretty good in. Now I know that not everyone's going to have that in, but that's sort of the network that I'm kind of trying to tap into in my outbound. So hopefully that's helpful for you. But right now it is coming from all over the place. Social, some of the outbound work, and then I'm on a coaching referral network where people submit like, I want to find a coach, and then they like show up in this like list, and then you kind of have to like try to like go after this person. Then you have to pay the person who referred this a fee. So it's a good source, but also it's like a expensive source. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks for the questions, Kevin, and also Faye for your point in the chat here. I know we have a few minutes left. I want to just, any other questions, thoughts? That includes you, Jason. Like any final things you might want to add, or any last questions anyone might want to ask Jason, please feel free to speak up or forever hold your peace. This is the moment.
Faye, I'd love to hear more from you about some of the things that are going on. You mentioned, sunsetting large orgs, and now I've planted a vision in your mind. But yeah, is there anything, a little bit more specific about what you're facing that we could talk about in this sort of final few minutes?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Jason. I am thinking that there might be a niche business to work with organizations that have reached a consensus that things aren't working around their mission, particularly in the nonprofit and the philanthropy space, to help them pivot before they exit. I know some businesses are doing that. I'm not sure totally about their methodology, but I really think there's probably a niche strategic consulting.
When you say exit, do you mean like completely shut down and liquidate
completely
access?
Shut down. This is a new movement that is hitting the space.
I wasn't aware of that. Yeah.
Heavily. So this whole notion of taking the organization and helping them pivot, I think there's something to that. I'm going to have to give it some more thought, but I really think there's a niche strategic consulting approach based around the framework you shared for this space. There's a lot of philanthropy organizations. There's a lot of nonprofits that instead of conducting strategic planning, they're literally planning how to sunset their business.
So on that point, what it did make me think of is an organization called Right to Be. They were previously called Holla Back. And so for 10 years, they were a nonprofit that focused on kind of, it started as an app to kind of like track when sexual harassment was happening on the streets of maybe New York and other places. And then it kind of grew into like bystander intervention training about how to intervene in the case of sexual harassment, mostly for women and non-males. But during the pandemic, they started with the rise of anti-Asian violence. They actually started doing bystander intervention training for Asian American individuals, and that community is a very different kind of community, and that got a ton of interest. And then they started doing bystander intervention for anti-Muslim and anti-Semitic and a lot of other anti-trans, and so they've really expanded. And I think they sort of have changed and pivoted in an expansion sort of way towards like, hey, we're trying to help people find a sense of belonging, women, Asians, all kinds of people. And I think that's a great example of them kind of, mission expansion or a pivot of some kind that I haven't seen too many others, but I'm not super dialed into the philanthropic world, but I do think it's a admirable example of people doing that.
Thanks for that.
Thanks for sharing the question and the answer. Great. I think that's a great place to wrap. We are perfectly on time. Everyone, it was great to meet you. Jason, what's the best way that they can follow with your work and keep in touch?
Yeah, I'm a big LinkedIn poster. I know not everyone's into LinkedIn, but I am. And I recently got the LinkedIn Top Voice badge, which is a very silly, insider activity, but that is where I do a lot of my posting. And I also have a newsletter at jasonshen.com. So those are two great places to get in touch. And of course, my email is jason@jasonshen.com. So hopefully that's enough sources where people can reach out or follow along about some of the things I'm doing. And appreciate all of you for being on this evening or this morning or wherever you are. And yeah, please stay in touch. And I hope to be doing more salons later this summer.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, everyone. And look for the path to pivot. Thanks so much, Jason, for the time.
Herbert, thank you for hosting. I really appreciate it.
Yes, my pleasure.